In EMDR, they talk about when we have painful life experiences, the brain fragments it into facts and feelings. And that's why we can know something logically, but our body doesn't know it. It's like if you ever hear someone say, well, a part of me knows that it's not my fault, but then this other part of me really feels responsible for it. I view it as your brain and your nervous system are battling each other. And so SE helps to address the nervous system and to integrate it so you can actually believe it 100%.
Hey everybody, it's Liz here, and I'm so excited for another wonderful guest episode of the Millennial Life Podcast. I am joined today by Kelsey D'Amore, who is a licensed professional counselor, supervisor, registered play therapist, supervisor. These are like awesome. Those can be hard to come by in our industry, and it's wonderful to meet people that kind of have dual supervisor licenses going on. That's great.
It's a lot to keep up with, but worth it.
Right? I know that on the back end. That is so true. So Kelsey, you are in private practice in Plano, Texas at Connect to Thrive. Kelsey specializes in working with clients that have experienced trauma, chronic pain, complex PTSD, anxiety, and ADHD. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes, I was really excited when I learned of you, and I'm very excited to connect with you. There are a lot of things about your multiple specializations that have become really sought after in terms of therapy. And I think just knowing that you have this play therapy element too is just amazing and fascinating because that just indicates you work with quite a range of clients. Is that right?
Yes. So I work with kids as young as 3 and all the way up to, I think my oldest client has been 72. So full lifespan, which is pretty fun because you get to see the range of different ages.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, that's vast and definitely unique, I think, when it comes to some therapists only stick around a certain age range or something like that. Do you find there's any challenge in seeing just a range of ages like that throughout any given day for you?
Honestly, no, but I like, going from working with a 3-year-old to then going to work with someone who's 50. It's kind of a good way to break up the day. There was a time when my caseload was only kids with trauma, and I recognized capacity-wise I needed to shift some things. So it works really well for me, and it's every day is so different, which is what I love too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Tell us a little bit about the clients that you serve and, what you love about that work.
Yeah. So like I said, I work with Lifespan, and a lot of people end up coming to me either after they've been in therapy for a while or they're looking for something very specialized. Especially with kids, I work a lot with sexual abuse. I work a lot with physical abuse and, pretty intense trauma. And with adults, it's a lot of complex PTSD, relational trauma from childhood, in addition to a lot of medical trauma. I work a lot with women and a lot of birth trauma that women have been through. And I really enjoy working with clients that have these kind of struggles because they want to heal and they've tried. And so by the time they come to me, I have a client that, was in talk therapy for 3 years and knows all the things and has all the insight, but can't get her body to integrate that and still has the same reaction. So what's really cool for me is being able to see patterns shift, especially, when people have been struggling for so long.
Yeah, that I can imagine is huge for them and also probably incredibly moving and meaningful for you to know that there are these modalities and methods that you can use that get them there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and Kelsey, there's a lot of letters and stuff that we're kind of spewing out. Obviously, trauma, big trauma, I'm hearing is a thing for you. I know that you use EMDR, SEP, which is Somatic Experiencing Practitioner, right? Can you
Yes.
kind of break those down for us and just as we begin, make sure that listeners know a little bit
Yeah.
about what those are?
Yeah. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is a very fancy way to say we engage bilateral stimulation to process trauma or painful life events. Um, So EMDR really focuses a little bit more cognitively on experiences that we have had. And the whole concept is based on the adaptive information processing model, which is a very fancy way to say our brain is a computer. And when we have experiences, it upgrades its software. So if we go through something that's difficult, our software changes, and then we will react differently in the future from that. Um, and then SEP, so I'm not an SEP yet. It's a 3-year program, so on the way
Okay.
there.
Got
But
it.
SE,
Training.
Somatic Experiencing, yeah, is founded by Dr. Peter Levine. And it's really all about how trauma and activation gets stuck in the body and then causes further emotional pain, physical pain, chronic pain. And it's about where our natural way to defend ourselves in fight or flight gets blocked or thwarted. And that's what causes a lot of the struggles that people have. So SE is a body-based modality that helps people actually
Mhm.
complete those responses, and then their body can externalize and let it go and release. So it's a
Yes.
little different, but they actually work well together, which is why having both is really awesome for clients.
I was just about to ask you that, like, are those things that are gonna enhance each other so they can work together? You can integrate both
Yes.
trainings.
Yeah. So, EMDR, I think what I tell people is really good for like a single incident shock trauma, like a
Mhm.
car accident or an assault or something very specifically that's happened. Whereas SE is kind of really good for the repeated patterns of things that have happened over time, like bullying
Yeah.
or, relational trauma from caregivers. But incorporating both is really cool because we can slow things down with SE if EMDR gets to be too much. But
Mhm.
EMDR gets to the heart of the trauma and really
Mhm.
helps people work through it quick.
That's fantastic, and I have heard that SEP training, I mean, it's extensive. You said 3 years. Is
Yeah.
that the kind of training where, like, you as the practitioner going through the training are also experiencing the training yourself?
Yes. So every training is very experiential, and you practice as the practitioner and then also as the experiencer or the client. Um,
Mm.
and so it's just I always tell my clients, I'm like, I've done this and I know it feels wild and it's weird and it's a different way to approach. But when things move, clients are always like, yeah, this is kind of crazy, but
Yeah.
I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, well, I think that's so critical to know that there are clinicians that they're moving through what they're helping their clients move through, and it's a crazy thought to have, but I suppose there really are some therapists out there that, maybe don't have that, where it's like, oh,
Yeah.
they're like using some model that they've actually never gone through.
I would hope not, but I
Yeah.
believe that probably does exist. But
Yeah.
yeah, and I think knowing what it feels like, but also, as a sidebar, speaking to like the therapist's own regulation and
Mm,
in the room and how we show up for our clients is
yeah.
really important. So that's been really cool to see too for myself.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear.
Hmm.
Well, so on this thread of like the nervous system work, I feel like this type of work has really gained traction in our field, become a
Yes.
big part of our field. A lot
Hmm.
of books are out there. We're all kind of digesting and stuff. But for those who maybe aren't as familiar, what does this kind of work entail? Work where we are, leaning into our nervous system.
So the beauty of it is we get to go as slow as your nervous system needs. Somatic is all about building capacity to tolerate feelings. So a lot of times when we are in a protective, traumatized state, or even people with just really high anxiety, um, it's really hard to get to the heart of stuff if we're just activated all the time. So
Yeah.
SE slows it down to where we're trying to connect to our body, even just experience what it feels like to sit with sadness or sit with anxiety, um, and slowly build the capacity to tolerate that so then they can actually process what has happened previously. And so it can be as simple as clients show up and they sit down on the couch and they update me on their week. They talk about things that have happened and we integrate body work within that. I
Yeah.
kind of joke with new clients, like, I'm going to interrupt you a lot. And it's not because the content you're saying is not valuable and important, but it's because your body has done something and we want to address it. And we want to make sure that we are able to release. So my work a lot of the times involves me leaning in going, I'm going to pause you right there. I just want you to notice that you did this with your arm. Um, and some of my clients, it's humorous and they roll their eyes, but there's a reason for it. And
Mhm.
one of the things I love about SE is we actually don't even have to talk about content at all. Like I have clients that come in and do not speak about anything that's happened. And we just work with what's in the nervous system because that's really what we need to address anyway. Talking about content doesn't have to be a necessity in order to process it. So a lot of people really like that because who wants to say that out loud? And it really minimizes like re-traumatization, which can
Right.
happen sometimes.
And is that dynamic right there, that fact that you're explaining right there, a piece of both EMDR and SEP? Or would you say sometimes with EMDR, clients are going back into content?
Yeah, EMDR is how I explain it to clients is like EMDR is more cognitive. So EMDR attaches a meaning or a negative belief to an experience.
Mhm.
Um, and so focusing on like how that shows up, it doesn't necessarily deal with sensations in the body as much. Um, but EMDR is wonderful and definitely
Yeah.
has a place, whereas somatic is purely body based. We can introduce meaning and absolutely clients can talk about content if they want, but it's not a requirement. And that's what people really enjoy about it.
I know, what a game changer. That
Yeah.
just throws so many modalities that have been around forever kind of like upside down on their heads a little bit.
Yes. And,
Mhm.
I am not a CBT hater. It has its place in this world,
Mhm.
but I do get a lot of clients who have done CBT or DBT for a long time. And what I always tell them is it's not an insight problem. Like most clients are able to identify what happened and what it caused and why they're struggling with things.
Mhm.
It's the integration piece with the body that is the problem. When in EMDR, they talk about when we have painful life experiences, the brain fragments it into facts and feelings. And that's why we can know something logically, but our body doesn't know it. It's like if you ever hear someone say, well, a part of me knows that it's not my fault, but then this other part of me really feels responsible for it. I,
Right.
I view it as your brain and your nervous system are battling each other. And so SE
Mhm.
helps to address the nervous system and to integrate it so you can actually believe it 100%.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, and not to go down like another rabbit trail, but I feel like maybe that's why IFS, internal family systems, has maybe gained so much traction as well. It really
Yes.
fits this language people can understand to those pieces you're talking about right there.
Absolutely. IFS is such a great complement to both of those things.
Mhm.
And, if only the training was easy to get into, then
I
maybe that's something I would do.
same here. Maybe we'll end up in there together. I hear rumors that it's going to be, a little easier to get into it some way, but we'll see. We'll see. So, Kelsey, you've talked about how chronic pain is something that shows up in your therapy office
Mhm.
quite a bit. And I think that's really interesting. I'd love to hear what that actually looks like when clients are coming to you with that experience going on and what you see.
Yeah. I get a lot of referrals from physical therapists, OBs, or even gastroenterologists, whatever, however you say it,
Yeah.
um, dealing with IBS. IBS is a big one I see.
Yeah.
Migraines, anything with inflammation in the joints, especially like fibromyalgia or arthritis or rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis. Like there's a lot of
Mm.
different ways that we see chronic pain manifest. And it's not to say the pain's not real. The pain is 100% real. But what I see and what somatic experiencing talks about is the brain and the spinal cord, the central nervous system becomes hypersensitive after trauma happens and the body holds it all. So if you think about like a car accident, and you were bracing really hard and that really never got integrated and released in your body, then bracing like this for years and years is going to lead to some problems within either your back or your neck, or you're going to get migraines.
Yeah.
And so what's really cool about somatic experiencing and EMDR is it helps to decrease those. And I've had clients that had migraines for years, and after doing some work around some of the stuff that happened in their childhood, they were able to start spacing those out in between migraines, and then it got a lot less and a lot less severe. So it's really interesting how it works. And a big part, I think, too, is people aren't aware that emotions can be connected to pain physically.
Mm.
So sometimes people are surprised when I mention, like, hey, do you notice, like, when you're distressed that your pelvic pain gets worse and that it makes it harder to function? And when you're not distressed, it's more manageable. Like, there's typically a reason for that. Um, yeah.
Oof, that's fascinating. And I imagine for clients hearing you make those connections, it's just this, oh, because
Yes.
it makes so much sense. And then when you are like the client kind of moving through that and learning these things about yourself, it's like, well, yeah, I've done this thing my whole life. Or, like I just think about those very like probably just like so basic but common things that maybe aren't so normal, like
Right.
grinding teeth or neck tension. People just like deal with it and live with it.
Yeah, and I think, the sad part for me is when people, like, will go get major injections or surgeries, and they don't know because doctors aren't telling them, but it's like, what if we tried SE first and see how that goes? But, a big part of
Yeah.
chronic pain is a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. Like, it's
Mm,
hard every day. And so I think SE also instills a sense of hope of there's something active that I can do and take control of, and I can participate and show up, and that can help alleviate symptoms.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's fascinating. I'm just curious sitting over here, like thinking as a
Mhm.
couples therapist, do you work with couples or do you see like how doing the somatic nervous system work can kind of really make those ripples into like relational healing?
I don't do couples work.
Mhm.
I leave that to you. You can that's
Send it
that's your
over.
area. Yes. Um, but I mean, I've had partners join sessions as a supportive way, to talk about ways to support, the client, or to talk about hard things in a safe container. But SE definitely can show up, in the interpersonal relationships. And I think it would be interesting to work with a couple together and see what happens in each of their nervous systems. I have worked with parents in their kids' sessions in play therapy, and having parents really notice, like, what happens when their kids make a mess? What happens in your nervous system? Do you get really activated? Do you find yourself bracing and tensing? Do you find your jaw get really clenched? Like, even just helping parents become aware of their own responses is really powerful. So I can imagine for couples, it would be incredible too.
Yeah, yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, I was activated thinking of my life as a parent. I'm like, I know how I would feel if I saw the mess, and it would throw me into my spiral of
Hmm.
anxious perfectionism.
Totally.
But I love that you shifted into that, and I mean, I would love to hear just how you integrate these modalities and the nervous system works specifically with children. Like, what does that usually look like?
So I mean, it's more fun in the sense that I have to be a little bit more creative in how we use it and introducing it. Um, but, kids are more willing to do things that maybe feel a little silly, like certain movements or say things out loud. But one of the easiest ways is, and maybe I should say a little bit about play therapy first, but
Sure.
play therapy essentially is meeting kids at their developmental level. Like, we as humans are born knowing how to play. That's how we process. And play is a metaphor for kids that gives them distance to emotional charge, meaning, like, the example I always give when I first started out, I had a kid that moved from LA. She was 6, and she was really having a hard time with the transition and the big move. So every week when she came in, she would play out moving day. And so every single week, that was her way of processing, like, what does this move mean? And it's scary and it's anxiety provoking. So integrating SE and EMDR into that is helping kids be very aware of their own nervous systems, of when they're playing things out. It's like, oh, I noticed you made this face when that happened. Like, let's do that. Let's do that really over exaggerated, like, or helping them slow down so their body can actually integrate the movements and release effectively.
Mm.
So, like, kids that are stuck in a flight response may look like the hyperactivity, like they're restless, they can't slow down, they're all over the place, there's messes everywhere. And doing SE with them might just be like, let's pretend that we're moving through sludge and we're a grandpa and we have to go so slow. And helping them slow down actually helps the release happen. Um, so there's a lot of really cool, quirky things. And I just tell parents, like, just roll with it, please.
Yeah.
Just trust.
Is it part of it kind of teaching the parents how to relate to their own kids in the ways that like you are with them?
Yeah. And, you know, the thing about parenting that I think is so hard nowadays is there's so much content online of people saying what it means to be a good parent and what it means to be a bad parent. And like,
Oh yeah.
parents are constantly getting flooded with new techniques and what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing.
Mhm.
And what I like to do is teach parents, how to help their kid regulate their nervous system, and then verbiage to use and how to show up as a parent being regulated, because a regulated parent is way more important than knowing exactly what to say and how to discipline in the specific moment. Like, regulation and attunement is one of the biggest things that we can do for nervous systems for kids.
Yeah, so huge. Well, yes, and I hear that so much in the trainings I've done too, and it's like being a couples therapist, it's actually brought me full circle to, like, parenting and just how critical
Absolutely.
that attunement stuff is at such a young age.
Hmm.
But, I bet you've experienced some of this, and I think I've seen this just time and time again over the years, whatever, like, people wanna take their children to play therapy because the child's kinda carrying symptoms of
Yes.
really the larger system,
Hmm.
um but you don't just want to work with that child, right? Like what's the difference and like what maybe happens when a parent just sends their kid to therapy and they don't want to participate? What's the impact?
Well, a couple different things can happen. I think one of the biggest things is it just delays progress. It makes it a lot longer than it could be. And, whether the parent just is in denial or they don't have capacity or, they're overwhelmed, I think that for a kid to be able to shift behavior, yes, there are things that they're going to work on and do themselves, but we also have to shift environmental factors. The way that I explain it to parents is like, kids, we're trying to build a bridge and they have half of the bridge, the half of the wood to build. And so do the kids. And the kids can meet in the middle, but they can't build the whole bridge all the way to the parents. Um,
Mhm.
and so, I think it's just constant education, because otherwise we're just the same week as the same thing and the same problems, and some behaviors may escalate. So
Mhm. Mhm.
I think I think a big part is also being able to name that maybe there are things in the home that we need to shift.
Mhm. Mhm.
Hmm.
And that's a journey. I totally can
Yeah,
understand that. It can take the
absolutely.
adults some time to get to that space where it's like,
Yeah.
oh, this is like really requiring me to look at me and the challenges in my relationships and whatever.
Yeah, and it's not fun. I mean, I understand
Mhm.
that, but one thing our office does a lot, is we actually get parents connected to their own therapist, um, whether it's in
Right.
house or in another therapy office. But we tend to actually see the whole family system here. So, like, I'll see a child, and then someone else will see one of the parents, someone else will see one of the parents, and another person will see the sibling. And the
Yeah.
change that happens when every person is getting support is incredible,
Mhm.
because the whole system changes when individuals are better able to show up authentically and regulated.
So, yeah, all these different therapy rooms, each individual part of that family system's growing their own capacity to like
Exactly.
re enter those relationships. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like obvious to think that way, but I just think like for therapists it is, I guess. But when you can't just have one person change and expect them to go back into this system with everybody else being the way that they were.
Right. And, I think parents can feel shame sometimes, and that's never what I want parents to feel. And parenting's so hard nowadays. There's so many
Mhm.
new things in the world. And again, just the information that they're flooded with. But, I think it's just being able to recognize your own wounds and
Yeah.
how that may show up, whether it's in marriage or couples relationship or with your kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Or that sweet critical inner child part of you.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. The little
that's my favorite
perfectionist.
stuff to
Yeah.
date. Yeah, I just love that work.
Mm.
But, you were talking about, like, how parental involvement can actually potentially shorten the timeline of, like, overall therapy even. Do you have,
Yes.
like, because I feel like SE stuff, nervous system work, I mean, it's a little more like you're honing in on this deep work for the long game and to
Mhm.
really establish some solid healing and not to try and get you to pin a standard timeline, but
Mhm.
is this work typically like a little bit longer? And should people kind of wrap their heads around like, hey, like commit to this for a while? Or sometimes is it brief?
Typically longer. And that's
Mhm.
only because of the slowness of it and
Mhm.
building the capacity, but it's also, we really want to make sure the integration happens. And sometimes there are, layers upon layers upon layers upon layers that we uncover. And once a kid is able to show up in the world and the things they came in with are no longer causing problems, or they're better able to navigate those things, that's how we know it's time. But in my experience, it's been more time. It's been I tell parents, in the first time I meet with them, I'm like, this is an investment. Like, you know, I'm going to ask you to show up, and like, we can discuss frequency and we can figure all those logistical things out. But at the end of the day, consistency is the most important thing with play therapy.
Yeah, I think that's awesome.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I know my question was kind of like just I threw that at you, but do you feel like it's a similar response for children doing this work and then like adults that are coming to see you?
Yeah, yeah. I think adults, I mean, the unfortunate thing for us adults is that we have more baggage to sift through.
That's true. That's true.
So kids are shorter in the sense of like, a lot of times they have less stuff. And so they're able to
Mhm.
get in there. And if parents are showing up and they're doing the stuff at home, like they can be in and out in a year for sure.
That's awesome.
Adult wise, I think it just depends on the nervous system.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's the hard part.
Right. Right. Yeah, and just that being said, like from your perspective, are there like quick wins that you see sort of happen along the way? And what might be some examples of those?
Yeah. I mean, I think they're really easy to dismiss, but you know, it's as simple as, if you're normally someone who is a perfectionist, who's on the go, like restless, can't slow down, like have to be productive. It's a win is even that voice that tells you like, wait, just stop and take a breath real quick. That is a win, because
Yeah.
that is the neural plasticity, like a new neural pathway being created. Even though the voice is small and we're just taking one breath,
Mhm.
we're stopping to engage with our body. And those little things add up over time.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because I'll, I joke with clients, SE is so simple, and that's why we don't do it, because
Mm.
it doesn't take a long time, it doesn't take much effort, and people just kind of dismiss it going, yeah, yeah, breathing, that's too easy, or grounding, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I get it. I get it. I was there too. Um,
But it's almost like we're forgetting the most simple yet most essential parts of the healing.
Yeah. And it's so funny because we all do it. Our prefrontal cortex, our thinking brain, as I talk with kids about, like it gets in the way. So we try and rationalize ourselves out of feelings. But even if we just put a band aid on it for the moment, we're not
Mhm.
actually releasing and dealing with it. We're just going, okay, I made it through that tough experience, on to the next. Um, and so being able to move through that and name it is really powerful.
Oh, that's huge. I love that.
Mhm.
So what would you say to somebody that is maybe considering doing this kind of work? Maybe they've heard of it or they're feeling curious about it?
Yeah. I would say that it gets to go at your own pace. I think, body-based stuff can feel really overwhelming for people because
Mhm.
obviously we as humans don't like to feel uncomfortable. That's why we'll do anything we can to avoid feelings at times, right?
Right.
Um, so know that you can go at your own pace. You are allowed to take your time and, knowing that it's not going to happen overnight. Like we don't just wake up one day going, my body is healed. It's those little micro moments, like I was mentioning, that build on each other. And then one day, I have clients that do notice, like, I had this happen, and normally, like a year ago, I would have done this, and this is how I handled it. Like, that was great. So
Mhm. Mhm.
it's about like preparing for the rainstorm where we can't control the weather, but we can control the resources that we have to be most prepared for it.
Yeah. Well, and so many people want to be like self-diagnosers, self-healers and all that
Yeah.
stuff. And I think, to an extent, right? Like, yes, get empowered and do your thing. But I think you're speaking to like the significance of a relationship with a therapist like you, where
Yes.
you are just like on this journey with the client for like a year or 2 years or whatever, and can really speak to those shifts that you're seeing with them.
Yeah. And I
Mhm.
think it's also, you know, in SC, we call it like a container, like, the
Mhm.
capacity. We want to build the container that's there. And having a container of going to a therapy office and someone being able to witness and hold that space for you is
Mhm.
so amazing. And, you know, that can be really threatening for people's systems of like, someone's going to see me and I don't want that. That feels too exposing, which is why it's so
Mhm.
great that you can go as slow as you need to.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you said that because it's like I've just talked to so many people that's like they want to feel better, they want to feel healing, they want to go to therapy, but then they like cancel their sessions or they don't keep up with it, and you're just like And even as like a friend on the side or something, you want to shift into that space of like, what are you thinking? But it's like they're not thinking. It's the threat to the nervous system, and sometimes we
Yes.
can't even cog cognitively, like, explain that?
Yeah. And, you bring up a good point of not having words to
Mhm.
describe what's going on in the body. And, I could talk for hours about pre-verbal trauma and birth
Yeah.
trauma, things like
Mhm.
that. But, knowing that a lot of times our body's not going to have words for what happened, especially if it was
Mhm.
before we could talk, because we cognitively weren't able to assign words to that. But that's why, if we try and intellectualize every feeling that comes up, we're doing our nervous system a disservice versus just the phrase that Essie uses that most of my clients kind of, roll their eyes and laugh at now is like, let's get curious about it. We don't
Mhm.
judge it. We don't evaluate it. We don't immediately go into solution focus. We just get curious and we want to be with it and see what happens.
I love that. Yeah, I talk with clients a lot about curiosity without judgment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What's that
That's
TikTok
Mhm.
trend now? We listen and we don't judge.
There we
That's
go. You're like, "Yes, I'm so glad this is on TikTok where people are
exactly.
gonna actually listen to it." But am I getting this right that, like, with pre-verbal trauma, I mean, obviously, people don't remember, that
Yes.
kinda stuff, but essentially, like, the nervous system does. It
Mhm.
holds it. It keeps it.
Yeah, and they've done a lot of research about, people that were born with umbilical cords wrapped around their neck and how when they are doing the SE work, they will have a lot of activation in their throat and there will be times they feel like they're gagging and choking when they've never had an experience like that they can remember.
Wow.
And, especially as babies, like our nervous system starts working at 7 weeks gestation. And
Wow.
inside, fetuses will show a startle response, like a woof, what was that? And
Mhm.
so, if that's happening at 7 weeks, we can only imagine all the things that can happen prior to them being able to talk.
Right. Wow, that is huge. I'm, like, so curious to know so much about that stuff, but I'm not gonna make you do it right now.
I mean, I'm happy to go into it. I love it. It's very fascinating to me.
It does sound fascinating, yeah. I mean, like, are there actually would that be, like, stuff that Peter Levine has written on and researched? Are there specific people that have gone more into that sector of like the pre-verbal trauma and really understanding that?
Yeah, Peter's done some really great stuff about it, and there's a lot of work that he's done with intergenerational trauma. So even from pre-verbal going to stuff that we have that's not even our own. Um,
Mhm.
One of the things I tell clients all the time of like, you know, he worked with descendants of people that survived Auschwitz. So
Mhm.
people that, grew up here, they were born in the US, they grew up here, they did not have that kind of trauma. But in adulthood, they were showing the same levels of PTSD as their ancestors that survived Auschwitz. And they also reported in times of distress, they could smell burning flesh. And
Wow.
so, thinking about how things get encoded in our system from our
Mhm.
grandparents,
Mhm.
because we are an egg within our mom's egg within our
Mhm.
grandma.
Mhm.
So, there's a lot that happens within that too, of sometimes the stuff we carry isn't even our own.
Mhm. That stuff is so fascinating.
Mhm.
Well, and to people listening that this is just a totally new information. I'm sure it can sound like
Yes.
kind of wild, but like there really is research, there's evidence around this stuff. Are there
Absolutely.
books you would recommend for people if they're kind of curious about understanding
Yeah.
more?
Yeah, Dr. Peter Levine, he's got a couple different books. The one I always recommend to people is called Waking the Tiger. And
Mhm.
that's basically where he just talks about the foundation of SE and how it came to be and his observations. And, he talks about a couple different cases that he had. But there's a lot of really great YouTube videos that he has online where you can observe somatic sessions where he gets interviewed and just talks about the nervous system and body. And I think that helps a lot of times too to just even comprehend like all the things that happen in our nervous system within the span of 30 seconds of something traumatic happening. It's
Right.
wild how much occurs.
That is wild. Well, and I just hear that you have sat with quite the range of different experiences that could happen from
Mhm.
people. I mean, so many different presenting situations and experiences. Like, is there any one that sort of sticks out to you as like, wow, this was like really just meaningful to kind of like move through with somebody or, yeah.
I think what comes to my mind specifically recently is, a client working on bullying and being able to somatically work through what he would have wanted to do versus what he had to do, which was go into freeze, and how that alleviated so much tension and so much of a fight response because the fight response was trapped. It never got to come out. He had to go into freeze.
Hmm.
And so being able to witness that is just, it's so cool. And it's so awesome to be able to see clients feel relief after carrying something for so long.
Yeah. Well, and it goes without saying, I guess, but like I'm still going to ask, do you see people like relieved from chronic pain and like those symptoms that they come in with?
Yeah, it gets better. I think it's one of those things where it's management, but we can lessen the severity, we can lessen the frequency, we can make
Mhm.
it to where life isn't so helpless day to day.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I just imagine that boosts the quality of life so much for people.
Yeah, because, you know, then they can actually be embodied. One thing I haven't mentioned, but like with chronic pain, people don't want to be in their body. It's too
Mhm.
painful. It hurts. And so then there becomes a really big disconnect with my body's betrayed me.
Yeah.
And I don't like my body for doing that.
Right. Right. Oof. Yeah. It's just so fascinating for me. I'm over here like, "Oh my gosh." Like, first of all, I could just tell you, you know so much about this and it's your work is immersed in this with clients, which is so wonderful. But I just knowing what I've learned about SE and the work that you're doing, it's like, boy, I just wish everybody could get a slice of that because like the impact that would have on our world, you know.
Yes.
Woo.
Yes. And that's the hope. I mean, I'm sure that's why you do what we do too, right? Like
Mhm.
the impact of we want to make life better for people and make the world kinder and help us all be embodied and show up and be authentic and
Mhm.
end intergenerational stuff that comes up.
Yeah. Well, and if I can ask, what impact do you feel like doing this work has made for you just on your own life?
I mean, so, even just talking about like parents doing their own work, I think for me, it's forced me to do my own work in the best way. There's a lot that, I didn't realize that I was holding somatically, where I was pretty shocked by how I responded to certain things in some SE sessions I had to do for my training. Um, so it's helped me slow down. When I talk about perfectionist people who can't slow down, that was me in my previous life.
Oh, I thought you were just calling me out.
No, 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 no. I was just referencing myself casually. Yeah, recovering perfectionist. It's helped me slow down and
Mhm,
helped me be able to be more present, instead of just kind of being a chicken with my head cut off, like all over the place all the time. So
mhm, mhm.
I'm just so grateful for that too.
And that's really cool to hear, and I admire that about you because just knowing that you, like, manage this practice and you have, built up this really great thing y'all are doing over there, I know that's just ripe with, opportunities for you to go right back into the chicken with your head cut off thing.
Yes.
But it's a
Yes.
daily practice, right? I mean,
Absolutely. And
really cool.
I within the perfectionism, which is a lot of a thing that a lot of people struggle with, healing isn't perfect either. Like we're going to have
Mhm.
days where it's just hard to regulate. It's just hard to be able to shake it off. And that's okay. Like we can just say it's a shit day,
Yeah.
excuse my language, but
Mhm.
and we can roll with that and know that the next day we'll have more access to resources and we can tackle it differently.
Right.
So it's trying to be right here, right now, in this moment. And that's kind of a catchphrase in SE is like right here, right now. We are not living in the anxiety perfectionism of the future, and we are not living in the depressive, trauma of the past.
Right.
We're right here.
I love that. If you don't
Yeah.
have a t-shirt, you should probably get one of those.
Right? Get some merch going.
Yeah, totally. So I wanted to mention this piece you had mentioned to me that you wrote a book a couple of years ago. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So, one thing I haven't mentioned is I have therapy dogs that I use. I've got two right now. Yeah. I have a weenie dog named Noodle and a
Oh,
golden doodle named Bowser.
are they like with you most of the time?
They're with me a good amount of the time. I would say they come a couple times a week. Noodle, if anyone has ever had a weenie dog, then they know the sass level that comes up with that. And so some days she tells me her capacity of like, I'm going to poop on the rug and I don't want to go in today. I'm like, cool. You've communicated that. Um, but I had a therapy dog named Stabler from Law and Order SVU, if you've ever seen that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And he was my soul dog.
No.
We joked in my office, he was the director of first impressions because he basically lived up here and he would greet everyone's clients in the lobby. And he was
No.
very gentle, giant. He was so sweet. And he ended up, unfortunately, passing away the week of the winter storm in 2021.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, he was only 3.5. And it was a very big shock,
Mm,
not only to me, but every single one of the clients that came to our practice. So
can't
the book
imagine.
is called Stabler's Important Job, and it's just about grief and introducing grief and loss to kids and how you can talk to them about it. Not just in a pet sense, but just in a grief sense in general, even with grandparents or if a kid has lost someone. So
Mhm.
it was part of my grief process, and it was very helpful.
That's amazing. Well, and I'm just so happy to know about it. We'll definitely put a link to your book in our show notes and
Awesome.
offer that for people to access. But Kelsey, this has been such a fun conversation with you today. Thanks
Yeah.
for doing this.
Thanks for having
Wondering,
me.
as we wrap it up today, is there like anything that you feel is kind of a tidbit you would like to leave listeners with, or any key point that's really made an impact for
Yeah.
you in all this?
I think I've got like two things. The number one thing is, not judging your body for doing things it needed to do to survive at the time
Hmm.
and having compassion for yourself, your younger self, your inner child, whoever it may be, that you did what you needed to. And we just have to show your body it doesn't have to do that anymore. And then the second piece I would leave is you know, slowing down and right here, right now is like using those things yourself of I have sticky notes all over my house, literally, that say slow down. And so when I'm leaving out the door in the morning, I'm able to see it. I'm able to take a deep breath and pause and do what I need to do slowly and not in a rush. So it's just, I would encourage people, like, find ways that you can slow down and reconnect.
I love that. I just
Mm-hmm.
pictured in my head the exact spaces I'm going to go put this Post-it today.
They're very
Such a good,
helpful.
and it seems so basic too, but a Post-it note to remind you of those essential things that you don't want to forget. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And knowing the slowdown is counterintuitive. Your body is not going to want to do it because it's used to going fast on the gas pedal. So, trusting that too.
Yep. It's the whole point, my friends. I love
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. I look forward to chatting with you more about all these things you're so versed in. Thanks for
Yeah. Thanks for
bestowing all
having
the
me.
knowledge on us.
Of
Yeah.
course.